I wonder if, given your family history and the fact that your uncle and father, they were assassinated in this, and they stood for things and actually did pay the ultimate price in some regard. Now, I don't know what your personal beliefs on why that happened. Obviously, there's some new information that came out about JFK and the collusion potentially with the CIA. There's some very interesting things that have happened beyond just the theories that are now emerging. But do you ever worry that you are actually physically in danger for what you're standing for now?
The answer to that is I do not worry. My life is in God's hands, and I need to do what I believe is the right thing to do, and whatever the cost is. And I also, I think my father and uncle were both fatalistic. They both knew that they were involved in a high-risk enterprise, and they believed that the stakes were high enough to justify their entry. And I think both of them believed that there were a lot worse things than dying. Mm. And they showed that repeatedly in their lives. My uncle and father both, volunteered for World War II, and my uncle really fought heroically. His brother was killed in essentially a suicide mission. His brother-in-law, with whom he was close, Billy Hardington, was killed on the Maginot Line. He had many, many friends who put their lives at risk. And I think that whole generation believed that there were things that were a lot worse than death. Mm. And I think, it's important for all of us to understand that. And one of those things is, one of the things that would be worse than death would be losing our freedoms. Mm-hmm. And living like slaves. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole generation of Americans in 1776 who put their lives on the line in really what at that point was a lost cause. There was nobody in the world who believed that we were going to beat the biggest empire that a scraggly band of American colonists could beat militarily the biggest empire in history of the world with the greatest fleet in history. And they put not only their lives on their line, their properties, their reputations, and because of their courage, we get to live in this country with a constitution, with free speech, with freedom of worship, with property rights and all of the other rights and privileges that we have as Americans that, at one point were really unique in the world. Mm-hmm. And, we have to remember that they were willing to sacrifice their lives for free speech, for the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And, it's kind of a crime against them and their memory and a dishonor to that generation if we're willing today to give up our own free speech rights so easily.
Yeah. You mentioned the word empire. And of course, empire stretches back even before the Roman Empire. There's empire in the way that I look at it is it's a consciousness, and the consciousness is control, absolute domination. It's elite emperors, kings, or rulers that control a large swath of the population, control by any means necessary, by force of violence or by force of thought. And it seems that we're in another position now in a different type of battle against also that same consciousness of empire. But that empire has spread seemingly globally as a global consciousness fueled by this kind of corporate collusion and political collusion. And it's now, once again, a small band of heroes that potentially nobody thinks is going to win, standing against this massive conglomerate of what you could collectively call capital E empire. And do you see the world in a similar light right now?
I do. And, and there's kind of two, kind of ways to reflect on your question. One is the role of America in the world, whether we are the model democracy or whether, we are an empire that is forcing the adaptation of our values and U.S. hegemony across the globe at the point of a gun. And from the beginning of our existence as a nation, our greatest political leaders were cautioning us that America could not be an empire abroad and continue to be a democracy at home. Mm-hmm. We would turn in that the exertions of supporting a military empire abroad would ultimately, by necessity, transform America's exemplary democracy into a surveillance state and security state at home. John Quincy Adams said, "Americans go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy." So from the beginning, and Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, in his most famous speech ever, and probably what today should be regarded as the most important speech in American history, warned against the domination of America by the military-industrial complex. And Teddy Roosevelt said, we will never be destroyed by a foreign enemy, that America's too big, that our borders are too secure, but that our democracy would be subverted by malefactors of great wealth who would destroy it from within. Mm-hmm. And then, then Eisenhower comes in 1960, 3 days before he handed the keys to the White House and the government over to my uncle. And he gives this speech where he warns America against the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would inexorably destroy all of our democratic institutions. And my uncle really spent 3 years of his presidency fighting his military intelligence apparatus to make sure that that didn't happen. And he died in that endeavor. My uncle had steadfastly refused to put combat troops in Vietnam, despite all of his advisors saying you have to send 250,000 American troops there. And he said, I don't want to make this an American war. This is a Vietnamese war. We can support him. He sent 16,000 advisors who were not technically allowed to participate in combat. And he, a month before he died, he ordered the removal of all U.S. troops from Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And as soon as he died, President Johnson, they staged this Tonkin Gulf, the incident, which was a false flag incident, and they used that as a pretense to send 250,000, ultimately 500,000 men, combat troops to Vietnam, and they made it an American war. Mm-hmm. And my father then died trying to stop that war. He ran in 1968 specifically against the war and died in the endeavor. So I think, and they were part of a long line of American politicians going back to Hamilton and Madison and Adams and Washington, who said we can't, if we try to make ourselves the policemen of the world, it's not only going to drain our resources and beggar us and ruin our economy and hollow out the middle class, but it also is going to destroy democracy at home. Mm-hmm. And that's the cost of war that we have to understand. Even when we go into, apparently justifiable wars like the Ukraine, we have to understand that the cost of that is not just $111 billion that we send over there, but it's also ultimately a threat to American democracy, to the middle class, et cetera. So that's kind of one answer to your question. The other one is that it has been the ambition of every totalitarian regime in the history of mankind to exert total control over every aspect of human behavior, over not only our movements, our transactions, our organization, but also ultimately our speech and our thought and what we read. In the past, none of those regimes has been able to manage that because they simply did not have the technological capacity to control every aspect of human behavior, to control what you were doing, what you were saying in your house, what your movements were, even your sexual behavior they want to control. But today we have created this wave of technology that now will give the next totalitarian regime the capacity to do exactly that. So they know where you are all the time through GPS technology for facial recognition. If you want to see what kind of the future is, look what's happening in China today.